Hi, my name is Joe, and I'm one of the pastors at Redeemer Lincoln Square. Now, let me read for you today's passage, which comes from Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 1 through 18. At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel the loan he has made to his fellow Israelite. He shall not require payment from his fellow Israelite or brother, because the Lord's time for canceling debts has been proclaimed. You may require payment from a foreigner, but you must cancel any debt your brother owes you. However, there should be no poor among you, for in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance, he will richly bless you. If only you fully obey the Lord your God and are careful to follow all these commands I'm giving you today. For the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised, and you will lend to many nations but will borrow from none. You will rule over many nations, but none will rule over you. If there is a poor man among your brothers in any of the towns of the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your poor brother. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend him whatever he needs. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The 7th year, the year for canceling debts, is near, so that you do not show ill will toward your needy brother and give him nothing. He may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to him, and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore I command you to be open-handed toward your brothers and toward the poor and needy in your land. If a fellow Hebrew, a man or a woman, sells himself to you and serves you 6 years, in the 7th year you must let him go free. And when you release him, do not send him away empty-handed. Supply him liberally from your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. Give to him as the Lord your God has blessed you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. But if your servant says to you, I do not want to leave you, because he loves you and your family and is well off with you, then take an awl and push it through his earlobe into the door, and he will become your servant for life. Do the same for your maidservant. Do not consider it a hardship to set your servant free, because his service to you these 6 years has been worth twice as much as that of a hired hand. And the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. Amen. Now, this passage that I just read for you is talking about what it means to protect the poor. And there's plenty of other passages in Deuteronomy even, but throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, about God's concern for the poor and the call for his people to care for them. But specifically in this passage, there's an important emphasis that is placed on the communal responsibility that the people of God had to establish a more equitable society than the ones that were surrounding them. And so to that end, there are 3 concerns that the poor had that the passage is addressing. And the first one is their inability to pay off their debts. And secondly, it was their inability to take out loans as a result of their socioeconomic status. And lastly, it was the inability to get out of indentured servitude once they were in that debt. And so here's how it's addressed. The first, we see that, and we see this in verses 1 through 6, that every 7 years, creditors would cancel the debt that was owed to them. And so that was a huge step. But secondly, and we see this in verses 7 through 11, there was an exhortation to not refuse loans based on one's income level because of the knowledge of the upcoming canceling of debts. Right? So we see on the passage, do not say to yourself, the 7th year is coming, and therefore I will not lend money. And third, we see that in the 7th year of one's indentured servitude, no matter how much money they owed, they still needed to pay back, they were to be given the option to be released. Now, when we look at other ancient Near Eastern literature, we see that there were, other kings, in order to curry favor with their subjects for some reason, would enact some of these measures at the beginning of their reign, this kind of establishing an equitable financial economic environment. But none of the nations surrounding the people of God actually had an economic structure that was built into it, the kind of laws that the people of God had. And so this was a extraordinary measure that God was taking to create an equitable society. But that was then, right? That it was then that these laws were given. But what are we to make of this? Right? How are we to apply this to our day? And I think the New Testament, if you go to the book of Acts, it gives us a clue. Because if you look at Acts chapter 4, actually, let me read for you verses 32 to 35. And here the writer Luke, when he observed the new covenant people of God, the church, here's what he saw, and he observes this way. All the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. Now, here's what we see here. We see that in the New Testament, that things may look different in the way it was practiced, but the same principle applied to these people. We see here again that there was not a needy or poor among them. And so what we see is that within the people of God, the church, even in the New Testament, we see a truly equitable society that existed as an alternative economic structure to the one surrounding them. Now, we've made one jump from the Old Testament to the New. Let's make the jump from the New Testament to our day. So how are you to apply this to our day? Well, here's what we're told. And I think it means the church is to address systemic inequalities within its own community, such that out of generous hearts they are to balance the scales, if you will, that have been put out of balance by the world around them, right? To create an equitable society. Now, in order for us to get there, what would this look like? And I think the thing that we need is we need to exercise a great deal of imagination. Because let's go back and ask the question, what would our world and what would our churches look like if Deuteronomy 15 was still true today, if we had to follow the same laws? What would our church look like if Acts chapter 4 was true today? And as you spend some time imagining that, how our economic structures would look different, how our church communities, more immediately to the context of this passage, as we imagine what our churches would look like and how it would look different than it does right now, it's out of that imagination the Bible is calling for us to work towards an economically equitable society, to see one another not as strangers, right, removed from the sphere of our individual financial economic concerns, but as brothers, as we hear time and time again in this passage, brothers for whom we are responsible. And so here's the encouragement for us today. Let's take some time to imagine together what this would look like. Imagine together, out of the generosity of God who gave so abundantly to us in his Son Jesus, to imagine and work towards equality and equity and justice in our midst.